Welcome back to Mr. Midnight. Tonight, we're heading to Oregon, a place where ancient forests hold secrets that were never meant to be discovered. These are 7 most disturbing true Oregon native legend horror stories. But before we begin, let me ask you something. Have you ever felt watched in the woods, like something old and patient were studying you? Most people ignore that feeling. The people in tonight's stories wish they had listened to it. What you're about to hear comes from police reports, medical records, and personal accounts that were hidden away for a reason. 7 people walked into Oregon's wilderness as one thing and came out as something else, or didn't come out at all. If you're new to Mr. Midnight, smash that subscribe button right now, because I bring you the most disturbing true horror stories you won't find anywhere else. Hit the notification bell so you never miss when darkness falls. Now, I have one warning before we start. Some of these people tried to share what happened to them. They wanted to warn us. But by the time they were able to speak, they weren't entirely human anymore. Are you ready? Because once you hear these stories, you'll never look at Oregon the same way again. Let's begin. My name is Detective Sarah Martinez, and I've been investigating missing persons cases for the Oregon State Police for 15 years. I specialize in cases involving Native American reservations and tribal lands, ADMT, not because I'm Native myself, but because these cases require understanding cultural contexts that most law enforcement ignores. I've worked with tribal police on the Warm Springs Reservation, consulted with elders from 9 different Oregon tribes, and learned that some of their oldest stories aren't mythology at all. They're warnings. 3 months ago, I was assigned a case that started as a routine missing person report from Crater Lake. What I discovered wasn't just another disappearance, for height. It was proof that the most terrifying Oregon native legends are still hunting today. The Klamath people have a word, asterisk, Imish skem asterisk, the hunger that wears faces. For over a century, they've been trying to warn us about something that was never supposed to escape from the deepest full of waters of their sacred lake. I'm sharing this story because 12 more people have vanished in the past month, and the official investigation has been classified. The FBI took over, sealed the evidence, and ordered everyone involved to sign non-disclosure agreements. But some truths are too dangerous to hide. The hunger is spreading, and it's learning faster than we ever imagined. The Oregon State Police Missing Persons Unit operates out of Salem, but our jurisdiction covers the entire state. My caseload includes everything from custody disputes to human trafficking, but I've developed a specialty in cases involving tribal lands. Not just because these areas are underserved by law enforcement, but because disappearances there follow patterns that don't appear in our training manuals. The Crater Lake case began on October 15th when Elena Vasquez called our tip line. Her brother Miguel had vanished during a family camping trip 3 days earlier. Standard protocol required a face-to-face interview, so I drove the 4 hours to Portland to meet with her. The drive gave me time to review Miguel's background. Construction foreman, divorced father of 2, no criminal history, experienced outdoorsman, nothing suggested voluntary disappearance. Elena met me at a coffee shop near her work, not the police station. She insisted on a public location, said she didn't trust official buildings anymore. That should have been my first warning. In 15 years of investigations, family members only avoid police stations when they're hiding something or they're genuinely terrified of what might be listening. She arrived exactly on time, but looked like she hadn't slept in days. Dark circles under her eyes, hands shaking when she lifted her coffee cup, constantly checking the windows and exits, classic signs of trauma or paranoia. But when she started talking, her story was too detailed, too consistent, and too disturbing to be delusion. Detective Martinez, she said, leaning across the table and lowering her voice, I need you to understand something before I tell you what happened. My family has been camping at Crater Lake for 8 years. Same campsite, same routine, same people. We know that place like our own backyard. And I'm telling you right now, my brother Miguel didn't disappear. Something took his place. She pulled out her phone and showed me photos from their camping trip. 15 family members, 3 generations, gathered around a campfire on their first night. Everyone looked happy, relaxed, normal. Miguel was in the center of the group, arm around his teenage daughter, smiling at the camera. Just a regular family vacation at one of Oregon's most beautiful locations. But Elena swiped to the next photo, taken just 24 hours later, and everything was wrong. The second photo showed the same family gathering, but Miguel looked different. Not obviously, not in a way that would alarm strangers, but Elena knew her brother. His posture was wrong, too straight, too alert, like he was listening for something the rest of them couldn't hear. His smile was perfectly normal except for his eyes, which were focused not on the camera but on the other family members, studying them with predatory intensity. That's when he found the artifacts, Elena said, swiping to the next image. The photo showed Miguel holding 3 obsidian arrowheads, each one perfectly crafted from volcanic glass. Black, sharp, ancient. Elena said he'd found them partially buried near the lake shore, where winter storms had eroded the bank. The moment his skin touched those artifacts, she said, everything changed. I've worked with tribal law enforcement long enough to know that finding native artifacts isn't unusual around Crater Lake. The Klamath people lived in that area for thousands of years before European contact. But they also know that some artifacts are dangerous, that certain objects were deliberately buried or thrown into the lake for good reasons. Elena said Miguel's personality shifted within hours of touching the arrowheads. He became quiet, withdrawn, watching everyone with new intensity. During dinner that night, instead of participating in family conversations, he sat silently cataloging everyone's behavior. How fast each person ate, whether they were right or left-handed, who they spoke to most often, who seemed strongest or weakest. It was like he was taking inventory, Elena said, not as a family member, but as something studying prey. The truly disturbing change happened after midnight. Elena couldn't sleep and went outside to use the bathroom facilities. On her way back to her tent, she saw Miguel sitting by the lake shore in the moonlight. He was having a conversation with his reflection in the water, but both voices were his own, one speaking English in his normal tone, the other responding in what sounded like an ancient native language. She crept closer and listened. The reflection was teaching Miguel about the family members, their fears, their sleeping patterns, their relationships with each other. It was explaining which ones would be easiest to isolate, which ones would fight back, which ones the others would risk their lives to save. Elena showed me a video she'd recorded on her phone. 30 seconds of Miguel talking to his reflection, both voices clearly audible. I've heard a lot of strange evidence in 15 years of police work, but this was different. The reflection's voice had an accent that didn't match any modern native language I'd heard. It sounded ancient, formal, like someone who had learned English as a second language centuries ago. The voice in the water told Miguel that it had been waiting, Elena said, waiting for someone to find the arrowheads and set it free. It called itself times Imish Skem asterisk, the hunger that wears faces. I knew that word. I'd heard it during cultural sensitivity training with the Klamath Tribal Police. Asterisk Imish Skem times wasn't just a shapeshifter or skinwalker like other tribes describe. It was something more dangerous. An entity that consumed human identity entirely, wearing people like clothing while learning to be a more perfect predator. Elena's story became progressively more disturbing as she described the next 2 days. Miguel Elena, or the thing wearing his appearance, began demonstrating knowledge he'd never possessed. He spoke fluent Klamath, describing traditional hunting techniques that hadn't been used for over a century. He identified edible plants that weren't in any field guide, tracked animals by signs that seemed invisible to everyone else, and demonstrated survival skills he'd never learned. But the most terrifying change was how he looked at the family. Elena showed me more photos from their camping trip, and Miguel's physical appearance was subtly transforming in each image. His face became sharper, more angular. His eyes shifted from brown to amber to something approaching yellow. His teeth appeared longer, more pointed. His fingernails had grown into what looked unmistakably like claws. "Look at this one," Elena said, showing me a photo from their third day. Miguel was standing with his back to the camera, but his spine curved in ways that weren't anatomically possible. His arms hung too long at his sides, and his head was turned at an angle that should have broken his neck. The family began to sense something was wrong, but cultural politeness kept them from directly confronting Miguel. Instead, they started avoiding him, making excuses to stay in groups, unconsciously forming protective clusters around the children. But Imish Scum Times was learning from their behavior. adapting its strategy based on their responses. On the third night, it began actively hunting. Elena's cousin Carlos was the first target. Around 2 a.m., he heard Miguel's voice calling for help from the forest, claiming he was lost and injured. Carlos grabbed a flashlight and followed the voice deeper into the woods, despite Elena's grandmother warning him not to go alone. They found Carlos the next morning, hanging upside down from a tree in a snare made from aircraft cable and ancient knots. He was alive but traumatized, babbling about watching Miguel change shape as he moved through the forest. Sometimes human, sometimes wolf, sometimes bear, sometimes something with too many joints and too many teeth. The snare itself was what convinced me. Elena was telling the truth. I've worked with military veterans, hunters, and survival experts. Nobody uses aircraft cable for animal snares, and the knots Carlos described aren't taught in any modern survival course. But they match descriptions of trapping techniques used by Klamath hunters before European contact. Emish Skem Times was remembering skills from its original host, a tribal hunter from the 1800s who had violated sacred laws and been imprisoned in those obsidian arrowheads. For over a century, it had been trapped at the bottom of Crater Lake, studying every piece of organic matter that sank into the depths, learning about modern humans from their discarded possessions. Elena said the entity began systematically stalking each family member, learning their individual patterns and weaknesses. It could perfectly mimic any of their voices, calling children away from safety by imitating their parents, luring adults into isolation by copying the voices of family members in distress. Her nephew Jamie, age 12, almost fell for this trick. He heard his mother calling for help from a ravine near their campsite. Only Elena's grandmother's intervention stopped him from following the voice into what they later discovered was a carefully prepared kill zone, a clearing surrounded by hidden traps and lined with sharp stones. The grandmother, Maria Vasquez, was the only family member who understood what they were facing. Born on the Warm Springs Reservation, she had been raised with the old stories, the warnings about entities that wore human faces but possessed inhuman hunger. She had brought protective items to the camping trip, sage burned in specific ceremonies, silver jewelry blessed by tribal elders, and most importantly, knowledge of time's Emish Skem asterisks limitations. The hunger cannot cross running water blessed by the ancestors, Maria told the family. It cannot touch silver that has been worn by the dead, and it cannot maintain human form if it feeds too quickly. But even with these protections, the family was trapped. Emish Skem Times had learned their vehicle locations, their escape routes, their communication patterns. It was systematically cutting off their options while studying their defensive strategies. Every hour they survived taught it more about modern human behavior. On their fourth night, Elena woke to find Miguel's tent empty and a trail of inhuman footprints leading toward where her daughter was sleeping. Elena found Emish Skem Times crouched outside her 8-year-old daughter Sophia's tent. The thing wearing Miguel's face was perfectly still, watching the child sleep through the thin nylon wall. Its breathing was wrong, too slow, too deep, like a predator savoring the scent of prey. When it sensed Elena approaching, it turned to face her. Miguel's features had become a grotesque parody of humanity. His mouth stretched too wide, revealing rows of sharp teeth that belonged to no human being. His eyes had turned completely black, reflecting light like an animal's. His neck twisted farther than human anatomy allowed, rotating almost completely around while his body remained motionless. "Sister," it said in Miguel's voice, but the tone was ancient, formal, utterly cold. "The small one dreams of running. She will make excellent sport when the hunting begins properly." Elena grabbed her grandmother's silver necklace, blessed by 3 generations of Warm Springs elders. The moment the metal came close to time's Emish Skem asterisk, its borrowed flesh began to smoke and blister. It recoiled with a sound that was part human scream, part animal roar, part something else entirely, like wind through ancient caves. "You cannot stop the hunger," it said, its voice shifting between Miguel's tone and something much older. "I have learned your weaknesses, your love patterns, your protective instincts. I know which child you would sacrifice to save the others. I know which adult would abandon the group to save themselves." The creature's form began shifting rapidly. Miguel's face dissolving into something reptilian, then predatory bird, then wolf, then human again, but wrong in fundamental ways. Its spine elongated, its limbs bent at impossible angles, its skin took on the texture of volcanic glass. Elena's grandmother appeared beside them, carrying a burning bundle of sage and chanting in the old Klamath language. The smoke seemed to cause Imish Skem times physical pain, forcing it to retreat toward the lake shore. "The prison calls you back," Maria said in English, then continued in Klamath. Gwetnamoke Shikek returned to the deep water. Imish Skem times laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "The old woman thinks ancient words still have power. But I have learned new hunting grounds, new prey patterns. Your cities are full of isolated humans, perfect for harvesting." It gestured toward the lake, and Elena could see lights moving beneath the surface. Other entities, other imprisoned shamans, responding to their ancient companion's call. The barriers weaken. Imish Skem times said, "Soon, all the hungry ones will walk among your people, wearing their faces, learning their weaknesses. We will feed as our ancestors should have fed." The grandmother threw her silver jewelry directly at the creature. The blessed metal struck its stolen flesh, and Imish Skem times began dissolving like smoke, its borrowed form unable to maintain cohesion. But as it faded, it spoke one final warning in Elena's daughter's voice. "I know where you live now. I know where your children go to school. I will find new flesh to wear, and I will hunt you properly." The family escaped Crater Lake that night, driving non-stop back to Portland. But Imish Skem times had absorbed enough of Miguel's memories to follow them home. Elena showed me security footage from her daughter's school, E.T. A figure that looked exactly like Miguel standing across the street, motionless, watching children during recess. But more disturbing were the reports coming in from other locations around Oregon. Hikers disappearing near traditional native sites, only to return days later acting strangely. Family members reporting that their loved ones seemed different after camping trips or hiking expeditions. All of these incidents followed the same pattern. Missing persons found near water sources, obsidian artifacts, and historical tribal territories. I started investigating these connected cases, and what I discovered terrified me. Imish Skem times wasn't the only entity imprisoned at the bottom of Oregon's sacred lakes and rivers. The state's native tribes had been containing dangerous spiritual predators for centuries, trapping violators of sacred law in physical objects and sinking them in the deepest waters. But climate change, construction projects, and increased recreation were disturbing these ancient prisons. Artifacts were washing ashore, being found by hikers, collected by amateur archaeologists. Each discovery potentially released another hunger back into the world. 3 weeks after my interview with Elena, she disappeared. Security footage from her apartment building showed 2 identical versions of Elena leaving together, one escorting the other with obvious predatory intent. Imish Skem times had learned to perfectly replicate its victims, using their stolen identities to access new hunting territories. The FBI classified the entire investigation, seized all evidence, and transferred me to a desk job in Salem with orders never to discuss the case. But I've been tracking the disappearances on my own time, and the pattern is accelerating. Imish Skem times now controls multiple human hosts across Oregon, Washington, and Northern California. It's teaching other released entities modern hunting techniques, sharing information about contemporary human behavior, adapting ancient predatory instincts to exploit modern vulnerabilities. Last week, I received a phone call from Elena's number. But it wasn't Elena's voice on the line. It was my own voice, perfectly replicated, telling me exactly which coffee shop I frequent, which route I take to work, which nights I stay late at the office. "Detective Martinez," my own voice said back to me, "thank you for all the useful information. The Hunger appreciates your thorough investigation of our capabilities." I quit the price. Oregon State Police yesterday. Started carrying my grandmother's rosary, Ever P. Not because I'm religious, but because blessed silver seems to be our only protection. I'm sharing this story because people need to understand what's hunting them. If you find obsidian artifacts near any Oregon lake or river, don't touch them. Some prisons are meant to last forever. And if someone you know comes back from camping, acting differently, if their voice sounds slightly wrong, If their eyes reflect light strangely, if they watch you like they're studying prey, trust your instincts. The ancient hungers are awake again, and they're learning to be human better than we ever imagined. My name is Jake Martinez, and I've been delivering pizzas for Tony's Pizza Palace for 3 years. I know that sounds stupid, but delivering food taught me something important about people. Paul Strain, you can tell everything about someone by how they answer their door. Mrs. Chen on Elm Street always has exact change ready and asks about my college classes. The construction workers on Riverside Road tip in beer money and tell me to drive safe. But the house on Maple Grove never turns on the porch light, never tips, and the guy who answers always stares at my car like he's memorizing my license plate. I'm telling you this because understanding people kept me alive for 3 years in this job. But what happened during my camping trip to Mount Hood 6 months ago wasn't about understanding people. It was about understanding something much older and much hungrier. I went camping because everything was falling apart. I'd just failed calculus for the second time and got kicked out of Portland Community College. My mom worked double shifts at the nursing home to pay for my tuition, and now that money was gone. She kept giving me these disappointed looks over her morning coffee, like I was just another failure she had to deal with. My little sister Sophia needed new school supplies, but we were spending money on my textbooks instead. I felt like I was drowning my whole family. My girlfriend Emma had dumped me the week before, saying I had no ambition, no future. She was probably right. At 19, my biggest accomplishment was knowing every shortcut between Tony's and the college dorms. I needed space to figure out what the hell I was supposed to do with my life. I'd grown up hearing stories about Mount Hood from my grandmother. She was half Warm Springs tribe, and she used to tell me legends about spirits in the forest that collected the bones of the dead. As a kid, I thought they were just scary stories to keep me from wandering off during family camping trips. But Grandma always ended those stories the same way. Some things in the old forests are older than our people, mijo. They were here before us, and they'll be here after we're gone. When I decided to go camping alone, something made me choose Mount Hood. Maybe I was hoping to feel connected to Grandma again. She died 2 years ago, right before I started failing at everything. I loaded my Honda Civic with a tent, sleeping bag, ramen noodles, and my phone to document the trip. Maybe I'd make a travel vlog, try to monetize my YouTube channel. At least then the trip wouldn't be completely worthless. The drive took 4 hours through increasingly dense forest. By the time I reached the trailhead, the parking area was empty, except for one other car, a rusted pickup truck that looked like it had been there for months. I hiked for 3 hours before finding the perfect campsite, a grove of massive Douglas fir trees that stretched up like cathedral pillars. The ground was soft with prazensic, decades of fallen needles, and a stream ran nearby. As I set up my tent, I felt this weird sense of being watched. Not by people, I knew what that felt like from delivering to sketchy neighborhoods. This was different, older, like the trees themselves had eyes. That first night, I called Sophia to let her know I was safe. She was excited about a school science project and wanted to tell me all about volcanism. Hearing her voice made me homesick already, but also more determined to figure my life out. She looked up to me, and I couldn't keep disappointing her. Around 3 a.m., I woke up to rhythmic clicking sounds. Click, click, pause, click. Click, click, pause, click. It sounded like someone tapping sticks together, but there was a pattern to it, almost like Morse code. I figured it was branches in the wind and tried to go back to sleep, but the sound continued for over an hour. The next morning, I started exploring the area while filming myself talking about the trip. That's when I found the first bone structure. It was hidden behind a cluster of smaller trees, about 30 feet from my tent. At first glance, it looked like some kind of natural formation. But when I got closer, I realized it had been built. It was a tower of bones, animal bones arranged in intricate, deliberate patterns about 6 feet tall. The bones were all different sizes and types: deer skulls, bird wings, what looked like bear ribs, smaller bones that might have been from rabbits. But some of the bones looked ancient, weathered by decades of rain and snow, while others were fresh. There was a deer skull at the top that still had dried flesh clinging to it. "Okay, this is seriously weird," I said to my phone camera. Someone's been collecting animal bones out here and building. I don't even know what this is supposed to be. I spent the next few hours exploring and found 11 more structures, 12 total, arranged in a perfect circle around my campsite. Each one was different, some tall like towers, others low and spread out like altars, but they were all made from bones, all with that same mixture of ancient and recent remains. By evening, I was seriously considering leaving. This felt like some kind of ritual site, maybe connected to illegal hunting or some weird cult. But it was getting dark, and I didn't want to hike back to my car in the dark. I called my mom to check in. "How's the wilderness treating you, mijo?" she asked, and I could hear the tiredness in her voice. She'd been working extra shifts to cover my lost tuition money. "It's good, Mom. Peaceful. I think this trip is helping me figure things out." "Good. Sophia misses you already. She made you a card for when you get back." After we hung up, I felt this crushing weight of responsibility. My family was counting on me to get my act together, and here I was hiding in the woods instead of facing my problems. That's when the clicking sound started again. But the time, I could see what was making them. There were figures moving between the trees. Tall, thin figures that moved wrong, their joints bending in ways human joints don't bend. They were carrying bones and arranging them in patterns on the ground, building something with skeletal remains. I grabbed my phone and started recording, my hands shaking. Through the camera, I could see them more clearly. They were about 8 feet tall with arms that seemed too long for their bodies, and they weren't just carrying bones, they were made of bones. Their bodies looked like someone had woven together bones and sinew into a human shape. Walking skeletons wrapped in translucent tissue. They moved with that rhythmic clicking sound, and I realized they were communicating with each other. I spent most of that night huddled in my tent, listening to them work outside. The clicking and clacking went on for hours. Sometimes it sounded like they were right next to my tent, but when I looked outside, I saw only shadows moving between the trees. Around dawn, everything went quiet. When I finally worked up the courage to leave my tent, I found they had left me something. Animal bones were arranged around my tent in elaborate patterns. But these weren't random, they were telling stories. I could make out hunting scenes, migration paths, death cycles. It was like reading a book written in calcium and marrow. I called Emma without thinking. I needed to talk to someone, to feel connected to my normal life. "Jake? It's like 6 in the morning. Emma, I know we broke up, but something weird is happening, and I can't do this right now. You always call when you're having some kind of crisis. I can't be your emotional support anymore." She hung up, and I felt more alone than ever. But as I stared at the bone patterns around my tent, I started to understand something. These weren't random decorations. They were gifts, messages. Grandma's stories came, flooding back. She used to tell me about the bone keepers, ancient spirits that collected the remains of everything that died in the forest, not to harm them, but to preserve their memories. Every bone held the experiences of the creature it came from, and the bone keepers were the forest's librarians, keeping the stories of every life that had ended among the trees. I spent the third day watching them work. During daylight, they moved slower, but they were always building, always arranging. Each bone structure was like a library, storing the experiences and knowledge of dead animals. Around afternoon, I found human bones mixed into some of the structures, pieces of hikers who had gone missing over the years. But the bones weren't just thrown in randomly, they were arranged with the same careful attention as all the animal bones, like the people were still part of the collection somehow. One of them approached me that evening. Up close, its face was a human skull wrapped in tissue so thin I could see the bone underneath. Its eye sockets held a faint, phosphorescent glow. When it looked at me, I felt something enter my mind. Not words, but pure knowledge being transmitted directly into my thoughts. It showed me the history of this forest through the bones of everything that had ever lived here. Thousands of years of memories. Elk migrations from before the settlers came. The last grizzly bear to die in Oregon. Native hunting parties from centuries ago. Loggers who died in accidents and were never found. All of their experiences, their knowledge of this place, preserved forever in calcium and phosphorus. The bone keeper communicated something else, an invitation. They could preserve me too. Not kill me, but transform me. My consciousness could live forever in my own bones, adding human knowledge to their eternal archive. I called Sophia that night. I needed to hear her voice one more time. "Jake, how's your camping trip? Are you feeling better?" "Yeah, sis. I'm figuring some things out." "Hey, Sophia, I love you, okay? And I'm proud of you. That science project sounds amazing." "Are you okay? You sound weird." "I'm fine, just remember that I love you, no matter what happens." After I hung up, I sat outside my tent, staring at the bone structures. My family needed me. My mom was working herself to death. Sophia was counting on me to be a good example, and here I was considering abandoning them for some kind of supernatural immortality. But as the fourth day began, I started to change anyway. I could feel my bones becoming denser, more connected to the forest around me. My skeleton was restructuring itself, becoming a better storage medium for memories and experiences. I tried to resist it. I thought about Sophia's laugh, Mom's tired smile when I brought home leftover pizza for dinner, Emma's face when we first kissed. But the transformation was stronger than my will. The bone keepers were teaching me their language, patterns of clicks and taps that carried entire lifetimes of experience. I could hear voices now, every animal that had ever died in this forest, speaking through their preserved bones. Wolves howling warnings about territorial boundaries. Salmon carrying memories of ocean currents and spawning grounds. Birds describing flight patterns that spanned continents. My skin became translucent. I could see my bones glowing underneath, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I had a purpose. I wasn't a college dropout or a failed pizza delivery driver anymore. I was becoming a living library. By the fifth day, I understood the terrible truth. The bone keepers weren't just preserving memories, they were collecting specific knowledge. They needed human experiences, human emotions, to complete their archive. And they had been calling people to this forest for generations, selecting those who felt lost, purposeless, abandoned. I was never meant to leave this place. None of us were. The forest never forgets anything. Every creature that dies here becomes part of the eternal memory. But unlike the animals, humans come with attachments, IBB, families that mourn, people who search, lives that are interrupted by our disappearance. I'm still here, but I'm not Jake anymore. I'm part of something larger and hungrier. The bone structures keep growing, spreading throughout Mount Hood. More hikers go missing every year, and their families report the same thing. They can feel their loved ones calling to them from among the trees. My mom still puts up missing person flyers with my photo. Sophia writes me letters that she burns in our backyard, hoping I'll somehow receive them. Emma started a scholarship fund in my name for students who can't afford college. They're trying to honor my memory, but they don't understand. I'm not a memory anymore. I'm a collector. And every time someone goes looking for me in these woods, every time they follow, and the bone patterns deeper into the forest, they're walking toward the same choice I made. The bone keepers are patient. They've been here since before the first humans crossed the land bridge from Asia. They'll be here long after the last cities crumble. And they're always looking for new stories to preserve. If you're reading this, if you found my phone where the rangers left it at the visitor center, understand what you're really looking at. This isn't a missing person case. This is a recruitment. The forest remembers everything. And now, it remembers you too. My name is Mike Rodriguez, and I've been a heavy equipment operator for 17 years. I've cleared forests from the Cascades to the coast, moved enough earth to bury entire towns, and seen every kind of equipment failure you can imagine. I've pulled bodies from collapsed trenches, watched cranes topple in windstorms, and seen grown men break down crying when million-dollar machines get swallowed by sinkholes. But nothing absolutely nothing, prepared me for what the Yakima elders tried to warn us about in Hell's Canyon. Some forests are graveyards, and the dead don't want to be disturbed. The Oregon Department of Transportation contract seemed routine. 15-man crew, 2-mile corridor through protected wilderness, standard highway expansion. Good money, remote location, 3 months of steady work. What the state environmental report didn't mention was the Yakima tribal consultation buried on page 847. 3 paragraphs about culturally sensitive burial grounds and Traditional spiritual sites requiring respectful approach. Standard bureaucratic language we'd seen on every job. The tribal representative who met us at base camp wasn't standard. Joseph Crowfeather looked like he'd walked out of an old photograph. Weathered face, braided white hair, eyes that seemed to see through you. He spoke to our foreman in English, then switched to rapid Yakama when he thought we couldn't hear. His voice carried across the camp like a funeral chant. "This place is not for cutting," he said, pointing toward the marked corridor. "The trees here hold the spirits of warriors who died fighting white soldiers. They chose to enter the wood rather than surrender. Their anger runs through every root." Our foreman, Dave, laughed it off. "Thanks for the heads up, Chief. We'll be respectful. Just doing our job." Joseph didn't laugh. "When the trees begin to bleed, you will remember my words. When your machines turn against you, when your men disappear into beet, bark, and heartwood, you will understand that some sacred places defend themselves." He left his business card, traditional beadwork on one side, cell phone number on the other. The kind of cultural bridging that makes everyone uncomfortable. I kept that card. 3 weeks later, I'd call that number begging for help. Day 1 went smooth. We marked boundaries with orange spray paint, set up equipment staging areas, and ran test cuts on smaller trees along the perimeter. My Caterpillar excavator grabbed saplings and pulled them up clean. Jimmy operated the backup excavator, while Carlos and his chainsaw crew handled anything too thick for the machines. Normal forest work, normal progress. Day 2 brought the first wrongness. Jimmy's chainsaw wouldn't cut certain trees. Not engine problems. The saw ran fine until the chain touched bark. Then it would scream like a wounded animal and die. We checked fuel mixture, air filters, spark plugs, everything perfect. But those specific trees, maybe a dozen scattered through our corridor, killed chainsaws on contact. The chains dulled instantly. Brand new cutting teeth, sharp enough to slice paper, turned blunt as butter knives after touching bark. But not just dull, damaged. Twisted metal, broken teeth. Chains that looked like they'd been grinding concrete for hours. I'd operated forest equipment for 17 years, never seen anything like it. Day 3. I started digging around root systems. Standard procedure, loosen soil before felling to prevent root bind and equipment damage. My excavator bucket hit roots 8 feet down. Normal enough, but these roots bled when cut. Dark red fluid pumped from severed root ends like arterial blood. Thick, warm, smelling of copper and pine, and something else, something rotting. The bleeding continued for hours, soaking into soil that should have absorbed it instantly. Instead, the blood pooled and congealed, forming black scabs on the forest floor. I called the environmental inspector. Required procedure when we encountered anything unusual. She arrived that afternoon, took samples, ran field tests, came back pale and shaking. "High iron content in the sap," she said, not meeting my eyes. "Unusual, but not unprecedented. Tree chemistry can be affected by soil composition." But I saw her hands trembling as she sealed the sample containers. Saw her glance repeatedly at the bleeding stumps. Saw her leave those samples in her truck instead of shipping them to the lab. Day 4 brought the symbols. Fresh carvings in tree bark, deep spiral patterns cut through to heartwood. Ancient-looking designs that hadn't been there the day before. No tool marks, no human footprints around the trees, no evidence of vandalism. The spirals were perfect, mathematical, identical across multiple trees. We photographed them for insurance documentation. But the photos came out wrong. In every image, the spirals appeared to move. Subtle animation, like watching smoke curl or water flow. We switched cameras, checked memory cards, tried different lighting. Same result. The symbols writhed on digital displays like living things. Carlos crossed himself when he saw the photos. "My grandmother told stories," he said quietly. "Yakama stories about trees that hold the spirits of dead warriors. She said they marked their territory with symbols that moved like snakes." Day 5. Jimmy started seeing faces in the bark. Called me over to a massive cedar, pointing at natural grain patterns that formed unmistakable human features. Eyes, nose, mouth, all sculpted from wood texture and shadow. But these weren't random patterns. They were portraits. "That's my dad," Jimmy whispered. "Exactly like him. Same nose, same scar on his cheek." I studied the bark formation, saw a face, sure enough, but it looked like my uncle Roberto to me. Same face, different interpretation. Then Carlos came over and immediately said, "That's my nephew David. He died in Afghanistan." The face in the bark was always someone dead, someone we'd lost, someone we'd grieved. Each viewer saw their own ghost staring back from the wood grain, and the faces moved. Subtle shifts in shadow and texture that made them seem to breathe, blink, speak without sound. Day 6, we brought in the big chainsaw for the central Douglas fir. 800 years old, 30 feet around, dead center of our corridor. The state had issued special permits for this tree, documented as the largest Douglas fir in the region. Historical significance, tourist attraction, environmental icon. But the highway went through it. The professional felling saw bounced off bark like hitting steel plate. No cut, no wood chips, not even a scratch. The chain shattered on impact, sending metal fragments spinning through the air. We tried smaller saws, different angles, carbide-tipped chains. Nothing. The tree might as well have been made of titanium. That night, I dreamed of the tree. Saw it as it had been centuries ago, a young fir growing from soil mixed with human ash and bone. Yakima warriors, dying in a last battle against cavalry soldiers, choosing to merge their spirits with the forest rather than surrender. Their life force flowing into roots and heartwood, becoming something more than human, more than plant. I woke covered in sweat, pine needles in my hair, dirt under my fingernails. I was still in my bed at base camp, but my boots were muddy and my clothes smelled of forest floor. Day 7, we installed security cameras. Insurance required surveillance of expensive equipment in remote locations. But the footage showed impossibilities, trees moving without wind, massive trunks bending and swaying in perfect silence, repositioning themselves like chess pieces. 60-foot trees uprooting and replanting in new locations. The timestamp ran normally. Everything else in frame stayed still. Equipment, rocks, our portable buildings. Only the trees moved, dancing in slow motion to music we couldn't hear. And they were moving closer to our camp. Day 8, we found Jimmy's excavator suspended in midair, wrapped in roots that had grown overnight. 40 tons of steel and iron lifted 8 feet off the ground by root systems that defied every law of botany. Thick roots, some wide as my waist, twisted around the cab, the boom, the tracks like massive rope. We tried cutting Jimmy free. The moment chainsaw teeth touched root, every tree in the canyon screamed. Not wind sounds, voices. Human voices shrieking in harmony, a sound that made our bones ache and our teeth hurt. The roots bled black fluid that hissed when it hit metal, corroding steel faster than acid. Jimmy was still alive in the cab, but changed. His skin had a greenish tint, bark-like texture spreading up his arms. He spoke in 2 voices, his own and something else underneath, older and patient and angry. "The forest is waking up," he said. "The warriors have been sleeping, but we keep cutting their sacred groves. They're defending themselves the only way they can." Day 9. We tried to evacuate. The access road was blocked by fallen trees, not wind damage, but deliberate positioning. Massive trunks arranged in complex barriers that would take weeks to clear. Our radios only picked up static punctuated by whispered Yakama phrases. Our cell phones showed no signal, but occasionally received text messages in languages that didn't exist. Day 10, Carlos went missing during his shift. We found his equipment arranged in ritual patterns around a cluster of cedars. Hard hat, radio, tools, work gloves, IME, all positioned in perfect circles like offerings on an altar. His chainsaw was partially embedded in tree bark, the motor still running, but the chain spinning backwards. We searched for 6 hours, called his name until our voices gave out. The forest answered back in Carlos's voice, but the words were wrong, ancient phrases in dying. Languages, spoken with Carlos's vocal cords from inside the trees. Day 11, we found Carlos. He was merging with a cedar trunk, his lower body fused with bark and heartwood. But this wasn't peaceful integration, this was consumption. The tree was digesting him slowly, keeping him conscious throughout the process. His screams echoed from inside the wood. "It hurts," he gasped when he saw me. "The tree is eating me from the inside. I can feel my bones dissolving, my organs turning to sap, but I can't die." The spirits won't let me die. Carlos explained what was happening between moments of agony. The forest was a mass grave. Yakima warriors had fled here during the last Indian Wars, choosing to merge with trees rather than surrender to cavalry. But the merger had gone wrong. Instead of peaceful transition, they'd become trapped in wood, conscious but unable to control their plant bodies. They've been screaming inside the trees for 150 years, Carlos said. Now they want others to share their suffering. They're building an army of the merged, the half-converted, the slowly consumed. Day 12, more crew members went missing. Not merged, worse. We found them scattered throughout the forest in various stages of plant integration. Some had roots growing through their bodies, anchoring them to soil. Others sprouted branches from their spines, leaves from their fingertips. All of them conscious, all of them begging for death we couldn't deliver. The forest had become a torture garden of human-plant hybrids. Workers who'd touched the wrong trees, handled bleeding roots, breathed in pollen that carried microscopic spores. The conversion process was slow, deliberate, designed to maximize suffering while preventing escape. Day 13. I tried calling Joseph Crowfeather. His phone went straight to voicemail, but the message played in reverse. When I played it backwards, his voice was clear. The warriors are awake. The forest is taking revenge. Get out while you still can. I found Jimmy hanging from his excavator, roots growing through his chest cavity and out his back. Still alive, still conscious, still screaming. The roots moved like tentacles, exploring his internal organs, mapping his nervous system, keeping him alive through the process. They're learning, he gasped. Every person they take teaches them more about human anatomy. They're getting better at keeping us conscious during conversion. Day 14, I was alone. The last crew member, still human, still mobile. The others were scattered through the forest, 19-4, some merged, some converting, some serving as living laboratories for the warrior spirit's experimentation. I could hear them calling my name from inside the trees, their voices layered and harmonized like a demonic choir. The trees had learned to mimic human speech perfectly. They used our voices to call for help, to lure rescuers into the forest. Park rangers, who responded to our emergency calls, joined the collection. State police, who investigated our missing persons reports, became test subjects for new conversion techniques. Day 15. I tried to burn the forest down, soaked trees in gasoline, lit flares, threw everything I had at the ancient groves. The trees absorbed the flames like they absorbed blood. The fire didn't spread. It flowed up trunks and into branches, becoming part of the wood itself. Burning trees that didn't die. Flames that gave no light. Heat that provided no warmth. The forest laughed at my attempts. The warrior spirits had spent lifetimes learning to control their plant bodies. Fire was just another tool in their arsenal. Day 16, the trees offered me a choice. Conversion or consumption. Join them willingly and retain some human consciousness during the merger, or resist and be slowly digested while fully aware. They demonstrated both options using remaining crew members. The willing converts screamed less. The resistant ones never stopped screaming. I chose door number 3. I ran. The forest let me reach the highway, let me flag down a passing truck, let me file reports with police, emergency services, environmental agencies. Every investigation team that entered Hell's Canyon joined the collection. Every attempt to document the supernatural was absorbed into the growing chorus of voices singing from inside the trees. 6 months later, the highway project was officially suspended due to environmental concerns. The area was declared a protected wilderness, off-limits to development. Joseph Crowfeather's tribal consultation report was suddenly taken seriously by government agencies that had ignored it completely. But I know the truth. The suspension wasn't environmental protection. It was quarantine. The forest is growing. The warrior spirits are spreading to other groves, other trees, other victims. What started as revenge has become hunger. They don't just want their sacred land back. They want everything. I still have Joseph's business card. I called him once, months later, when I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't forget the sound of Jimmy's voice calling my name from inside the cedar bark. The warriors wanted you to escape, he told me. You were chosen to carry their warning. The merger isn't complete yet, but it will be soon. When every tree in Oregon holds a human soul, when every forest becomes a city of the converted, the spirits will have their revenge against the modern world. I quit construction work, moved to the city, surrounded myself with concrete and steel. But sometimes, walking past city parks, I hear voices calling from inside the trees. Familiar voices. Crew members who should be dead, tourists who disappeared on hiking trips, children who wandered too far from camping sites. The forest is coming to the cities, one tree at a time, one conversion at a time, one scream at a time. If you live in Oregon, if you work outdoors, if you love hiking in old-growth forests, $1, listen to the trees. When they start calling your name, when the bark begins to bleed, when the roots reach for your ankles, remember this story. The Yakama elders tried to warn us. The trees remember everything. And the dead are very, very patient. The highway through Hell's Canyon was never built. But sometimes, late at night, travelers report seeing construction lights deep in the forest. Hearing equipment running, voices calling, chainsaws screaming in the distance. That's my crew. Still working, still cutting, still feeding the trees, still screaming. My name is Dr. Rebecca Foster, and I've been a licensed trauma psychologist for 15 years at Willamette Valley Family Crisis Center, just outside Forest Grove, Oregon. I specialize in child psychology and Native American cultural trauma. I've worked with the Kalapuya tribal community for over a decade, helping children process generational trauma and cultural displacement. I thought I understood the difference between ancient legends and modern psychological manifestations. But what happened during my emergency session with Amanda Crowfeather 3 weeks ago changed everything I thought I knew about the thin line between cultural memory and living horror. Amanda worked at Little Mountain Daycare, located 15 miles west of Forest Grove, near what the old maps still call Forked Mountain. The facility served both tribal and non-tribal children from surrounding communities. Amanda was Kalapuya herself, one of the few remaining fluent speakers of Lukiamut Kalapuya. She specifically requested to meet with me because of my work with tribal families, claiming the children were exhibiting behaviors that traditional Western psychology couldn't explain. When Amanda walked into my office that gray October afternoon, I immediately noticed something was wrong. She moved like someone who hadn't slept in days, constantly glancing at the windows, checking the locks on doors. Her usually perfect traditional beadwork was disheveled, and her hands shook as she clutched a manila folder full of children's artwork. My office is located in an old converted farmhouse on the edge of the Willamette Valley. We chose the location specifically to feel less clinical for tribal families, with natural wood paneling, traditional native artwork on the walls, and large windows overlooking the forested hills toward Forked Mountain. The building has modern security systems, but maintains the warm, non-threatening atmosphere that helps children feel safe. That afternoon, storm. Clouds were gathering over the mountain, and the autumn light filtering through the windows had an unsettling greenish quality. Amanda had been working at Little Mountain for 6 years, ever since completing her early childhood education degree at Chemeketa Community College. The daycare was her first job after graduation, and she'd built strong relationships with both the children and their families. She was known for incorporating traditional Kalapuya stories and songs into her curriculum, helping preserve cultural knowledge that had nearly been lost during the boarding school era. "Dr. Foster," she began, settling into the chair across from me, but immediately sitting forward, tense. "I need you to understand something before I show you what the children have been drawing. 3 weeks ago, during our traditional storytelling time, I made a terrible mistake. I encouraged her to continue, noting the formal way she was speaking. She completely different from her usual casual manner during our previous tribal community meetings. I told them the story of Amhuluk, not the sanitized version we usually share, but the real one, the one my grandmother told me before she died." Her voice dropped to almost a whisper. "The one that explains why our people never built permanent villages near Forked Mountain Lake. Amhuluk." I'd heard references to this figure in Kalapuya oral traditions, a water spirit associated with drowning and disease. But Amanda was speaking about it like it was something more than folklore. "What happened after you told the story?" Amanda opened the manila folder with trembling hands. "The children became obsessed. Not just interested, obsessed. They started drawing pictures during free time, during lunch, during outdoor play, always the same thing. She handed me the first drawing. The artwork was from 5-year-old Emma Clearwater. It showed a lake surrounded by upside-down trees, their roots reaching toward the sky like grasping fingers. In the center of the water, a spotted creature with long horns held 2 small figures impaled on those horns. The detail was far beyond what I'd expect from a child Emma's age. The creature's spotted hide was meticulously rendered, and the expression of pain on the impaled children's faces was disturbingly realistic. Emma drew this the day after I told the story, Amanda said. But look at the next one. This drawing, from 6-year-old Marcus Thompson, showed the same scene from a different angle. The horned creature was emerging from muddy water, and the 2 children on its horns were speaking. Speech bubbles contained the words, "We changed bodies," written in a child's uncertain handwriting. Did you teach them that phrase? That's just it. I never mentioned those words. In the traditional story, the children say, "Daide, Daide, Daide, we have changed our bodies in Kalapuya." But these children don't speak Kalapuya. They shouldn't know what it means. I studied the drawing more carefully. The creature's eyes were drawn with particular attention. They seemed to follow you no matter which angle you viewed the picture from. What else have you noticed? The children have started playing a new game during recess. They call it Amhuluk's children. 3 of them pretend to be the creature's spotted dogs, running around on all 4s, while the others pretend to be drowning victims. But Dr. Foster, she paused, struggling with her words. They're too good at it. When they pretend to drown, their faces actually turn blue. When they act like the spotted dogs, they move exactly like wild animals, not like children pretending to be animals. This was concerning. Children's play often reflected psychological processing, but physical symptoms during play suggested something more serious. Have their parents noticed any changes? That's why I'm here. 3 children have gone missing from the area this month. Not missing, but changed. My pen stopped moving across my notepad. Changed how? Sarah Chen disappeared for 18 hours last Tuesday. Her parents found her at sunrise, standing waist-deep in Forked Mountain Lake, completely dry despite being in the water. She had no memory of how she got there, but when they brought her home, she could suddenly speak fluent Kalapuya, words she'd never heard before. I felt my mouth go dry. That's impossible. David Martinez vanished for 2 full days. Search and rescue found him sleeping peacefully in a cave near the lake. When they woke him up, his personality was completely different. David used to be hyperactive, couldn't sit still for 5 minutes. Now, he sits for hours, staring at other children's faces like he's memorizing them. And he draws constantly, always the same thing. Amanda handed me another drawing. This one showed children standing around the lake, but their reflections in the water were not their own. Instead, the reflections showed the spotted creature with different children's faces superimposed on its head. Yesterday, little Emma Clearwater went missing during nap time. The teachers searched everywhere. She wasn't in the building, wasn't on the playground. But an hour later, she was back in her sleeping mat like nothing happened. When I asked her where she'd been, she looked at me with these ancient eyes and said, "I went to see the old stories, Miss Amanda." Amhuluk showed me how the water remembers everything. A chill ran down my spine. What did she mean by that? Emma has never been to Forked Mountain Lake. Her family lives in town. But she described the place perfectly, down to the inverted trees and the way the water reflects the sky upside down. She knew about the soft ground around the lake that traps animals. She knew about the spotted dogs that hunt in packs, things that aren't in any modern telling of the story. Amanda pulled out more drawings, spreading them across my coffee table. Each one showed increasing detail and sophistication. The children were drawing things that should have been beyond their cultural knowledge. Traditional Kalapuya symbols, landscape features of the lake area, and anatomical details of the creature that were both precise and terrifying. Dr. Foster, I think telling that story awakened something. Not metaphorically, literally. In Kalapuya tradition, certain stories aren't just entertainment. They're warnings. They're barriers. By telling the children about Amhuluk, we invited it to notice them. Before I could respond, the lights in my office flickered. Just once, but long enough to cast the room in an unsettling shadow. When they came back on, Amanda was staring at something behind me. "Dr. Foster, look at your window." I turned around. On the glass from the outside, small handprints were appearing in the condensation. Child-sized handprints, but with too many fingers. And they were multiplying, covering the entire window in a pattern that reminded me of the spotted hide in the children's drawings. "Those weren't there a minute ago," I whispered. The handprints began to move, sliding down the glass like they were being pressed by invisible hands. As they moved, they left trails that formed symbols, the same traditional Kalapuya markings from the children's artwork. Amanda grabbed my arm. "It's here. Amhuluk has been watching the children through their drawings. Every detail they drew gave it more information about our world, our time, our location." The temperature in the room dropped noticeably. My breath began to fog, and I could hear something that sounded like children giggling, but the sound was coming from the walls themselves. "We need to leave now," Amanda said, but as she stood up, the door to my office swung shut with a definitive click. "Dr. Foster?" A child's voice echoed through the room, but no child was present. "Dr. Foster, we want to show you the water game." "That's Emma's voice," Amanda whispered. "But Emma is at daycare. She should be 30 miles away." The voice came again, but from a different direction. "Miss Amanda, why did you tell the old stories? Now we have to go to the water place." This time it was David's voice, followed immediately by Sarah's. "The spotted one showed us how to change bodies. Do you want to try?" The handprints on the window began glowing with a pale green light, the same sickly color I'd noticed in the afternoon sky. Through the glass, I could see shapes moving in the forest, small figures that looked like children, but their movements were too fluid, too coordinated. "In the traditional story," Amanda said, her voice barely audible, "Amhuluk doesn't just drown people. It changes them. The children in the lake aren't dead. They're transformed. They become extensions of the creature, scouts that can move through our world." The giggling grew louder, and now I could hear splashing sounds, as if the office was slowly filling with water. But we were on the second floor of a building, miles from any lake. The children who went missing, I realized with growing horror, they didn't come back. Something else came back wearing their faces. Amanda nodded grimly. "In Kalapuya belief, Amhuluk can steal your reflection and use it to create a copy of you. The copy has all your memories, your mannerisms, your voice, but it serves the lake creature." My computer monitor flickered to life, showing what looked like a live video feed of Forked Mountain Lake. The water was completely still, but as we watched, 3 small heads emerged from the surface. They were the missing children, Sarah, David, and Emma, but their eyes were the wrong color, and when they opened their mouths to speak, water poured out instead of words. "Dr. Foster," they said in unison, their voices somehow reaching us through the blood. Computer speakers. "Amhuluk wants to meet you. The old stories are hungry for new storytellers." The building began to shake, and I could hear what sounded like massive footsteps in the hallway outside my office. But the footsteps had a liquid quality, like something enormous was walking through water. Amanda grabbed the traditional sage bundle she always carried and lit it with her lighter. The sharp, cleansing smell filled the room. "Smoke confuses water spirits," she explained. "It might buy us time." The shaking stopped, and the children's voices on the computer became angry. "Fire hurts the water place. Why do you hurt us?" But their anger revealed something important. They were affected by traditional protective methods. Amanda began chanting quietly in Kalapuya, words I didn't understand, but that seemed to have power. The handprints on the window began to fade, and the giggling grew distant. "It's working," I whispered. "No," Amanda said, still chanting. "It's retreating, but not because we're driving it away. It's going back to the lake to get stronger. The children it has taken, they're anchors now. As long as they remain in Amhuluk's domain, it can reach further into our world." The computer monitor went black, but before it died completely, we saw one final image. Dozens of children standing around the lake's edge, all facing our direction, all pointing directly at the camera. Some of them I recognized from the daycare. Others looked older, their clothing from different time periods, as if Amhuluk had been collecting children for generations. "We have to get to the lake," Amanda said. "Tonight, before the new moon." In the old stories, Amhuluk is strongest when the sky is reflected most clearly in the water. "That's insane. We should call the police, the tribal council, Child Protective Services. And tell them what? That a legendary water creature is stealing children's identities? They'll think we're having a shared psychotic break. Amanda's eyes were fierce with determination. But the tribal elders will understand. My grandmother taught me the old protections for a reason. She was right. This was beyond the scope of modern institutional help. We were dealing with something that existed in the intersection between cultural memory and supernatural reality. As we prepared to leave, my phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. The water remembers all the children who played by its shore. Come alone, Dr. Foster. Bring the storyteller. We have so much to show you about changing bodies. The message was accompanied by a photo, my own office, taken from the window we'd been looking out of. But in the photo, Amanda and I weren't alone. Standing behind us, barely visible as translucent figures, were 3 children with spotted skin and eyes like dark water. That night, Amanda and I drove to Forked Mountain Lake. We brought traditional tobacco, sage, and cedar, along with my digital recorder and emergency medical supplies. Amanda had called her grandmother's sister, one of the last tribal elders who remembered the old protection ceremonies. The lake was exactly as the children had drawn it. Upside-down trees reflected in still, dark water, soft, boggy ground that seemed to grab at our feet. And standing in the shallows, perfectly motionless, were Sarah, David, and Emma. But as our flashlight beams hit them, we could see they were wrong. Their skin had a spotted pattern like the creature in the drawings. Their eyes reflected light like an animal's. And when they smiled at us, their teeth were too sharp. "Dr. Foster," they said in perfect unison. "Miss Amanda, thank you for coming to the water place. Amhuluk has been so lonely since the last storyteller visited." The water began to churn, and something massive stirred beneath the surface. We had found the source of the horror. Now we had to decide whether we could do anything to stop it, or if we had simply delivered ourselves to the thing that had been calling us all along. What happened next would determine not just our fate, but the fate of every child who had ever heard the old stories. Because some legends aren't meant to be told, they're meant to be contained. And we had just broken the oldest containment of all. Asterisk. This is a continuing investigation. If you live in the Pacific Northwest and have experienced similar phenomena, particularly involving children and water-related imagery, please contact the Kalapuya Cultural Preservation Council. Some stories are too dangerous to face alone. My name is Dr. Sarah Running Bear, and I've been a wildlife biologist with the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife for 12 years. I got my PhD in predator ecology from Oregon State, specializing in wolf-pack behavior and territorial dynamics. I've tracked everything from mountain lions to black bears across the Pacific Northwest. I've handled aggressive wolves, studied pack hierarchies, and spent countless nights alone in the wilderness monitoring predator movements. But what happened in Hell's Canyon 3 years ago changed everything I thought I knew about the natural world. Some things in the wild aren't natural at all. The call came in on a Tuesday morning in late September. I was sitting in my cramped office in Salem, reviewing GPS collar data from our Cascade wolf packs, when my supervisor knocked on my door. "Sarah, we've got a situation in Hell's Canyon. Ranchers are reporting some very unusual wolf activity. I need you to take a team and investigate." The reports were bizarre. Livestock weren't just being killed. They were being hunted using what appeared to be tools. Ranchers described finding cattle caught in rope snares, positioned perfectly to funnel animals into ambush points. The attack patterns showed military-level coordination, with wolves working in precise formations that no wild pack should know. Most disturbing were the tracks. Standard wolf paw prints mixed with what looked like bipedal impressions, as if something was walking upright part of the time. I assembled my team carefully. Marcus Wolf Song was our best tracker, a Nez Perce tribal member who'd grown up in these mountains and could read sign like a book. Jennifer Chen was my graduate student, brilliant but young, working on her thesis about pack adaptation strategies. Both were experienced in the field, and I trusted them completely. We loaded our equipment into my fish and wildlife truck: GPS units, radio collars, trail cameras, camping gear, and standard tranquilizer guns for emergency wolf encounters. The drive to Hell's Canyon took 4 hours through increasingly remote country. My radio crackled with static as we lost cell coverage, leaving us dependent on satellite communication. The landscape grew more rugged with each mile. Steep canyon walls, dense pine forests, and the Snake River cutting through rock formations like a knife. This was wild country, the kind of place where people could disappear without a trace. We set up base camp at the ranger station, a small wooden building that hadn't seen maintenance in years. The local rancher, Pete Morrison, met us there with his face grim and his hands shaking slightly as he lit another cigarette. "Doc, I've been running cattle in this canyon for 30 years. Never seen anything like this. These wolves? They're thinking, planning. It's not natural." He led us to the first kill site. What I saw there made my stomach drop. A prize bull, easily 1,200 pounds, had been driven into a narrow ravine where escape was impossible. But the wolves hadn't just chased it randomly. They'd used fallen logs to block alternate escape routes, creating a perfect kill funnel. Rope marks on nearby trees showed where snares had been set. The coordination required was beyond anything in the scientific literature. Marcus knelt beside the tracks, his face growing increasingly troubled. "Sarah, these prints, they're wrong. Look at the spacing. No wolf walks with this stride length. And here." He pointed to a clear impression in the mud. "This pad print has claw marks, but the depth suggests it was made by something much heavier than any wolf I've seen." Jennifer was examining the rope fragments with growing excitement. "Doctor, running bear, this is incredible. We're looking at tool use in wolves. This could revolutionize everything we know about canine intelligence." Her enthusiasm made me nervous. In science, revolutionary discoveries usually meant you'd made a mistake somewhere. That night, sitting around our camp stove, I radioed headquarters in Salem. The static was terrible, cutting in and out as I tried to report our preliminary findings. "Base, this is Running Bear. We've confirmed unusual predator behavior, but we need more time to assess the situation. Requesting 3 additional days in the field." "Copy that, Sarah. Any safety concerns?" I looked at my team, both absorbed in their field notes by flashlight. "Negative on safety concerns. We're maintaining standard protocols." I should have said yes. I should have requested immediate backup. But my professional pride wouldn't let me admit that I was scared of wolves. The second day brought more disturbing evidence. We found what appeared to be a modified den site, not the typical shallow depression wolves dig, but an elaborate network of tunnels with multiple entry points and what looked like supply caches. The engineering was sophisticated, designed for defense and long-term occupation. Fresh scat samples contained unusual materials, fabric fragments, metal pieces, and what Jennifer swore were human hair strands. "This doesn't match any known wolf behavior," I muttered, photographing everything with my digital camera. "Pack structures don't work this way. There should be a clear alpha hierarchy, but these formations suggest something more like military command structure." Marcus had been quiet all morning, studying tracks that seemed to appear and disappear without pattern. Finally, he stood up and brushed dirt from his knees. "Sarah, there's something I need to tell you. My grandfather used to tell stories about this area. Said it was sacred to our people, but also dangerous. There were ceremonies here, back before the government banned them." "What kind of ceremonies?" Jennifer asked, her pen poised over her notebook. "Skin dancing. Warriors would take animal spirits into themselves, gain their abilities. The stories say some got stuck between forms, became something that wasn't quite human and wasn't quite animal." I felt my scientific skepticism kicking in. "Marcus, I respect your cultural background, but we need to focus on observable data. There has to be a biological explanation for what we're seeing." But that night, our trail cameras captured something that challenged every biological explanation I knew. The footage showed a figure moving through our perimeter at 2:47 a.m. At first glance, it looked like a large wolf, easily 6 feet long. But as it passed directly in front of the camera, it rose up on its hind legs and walked upright for several steps before dropping back to all fours. The gait was fluid, natural, as if walking on 2 legs was as comfortable as 4. Jennifer was ecstatic when we reviewed the footage the next morning. "This is unprecedented. We're documenting evolutionary adaptation in real time. These wolves are developing bipedal locomotion as a hunting strategy." It wasn't so sure. The figure in the video moved with an intelligence that made my skin crawl. When it looked directly at the camera, I swear I saw human awareness in those eyes. On the third day, Marcus led us to a site his grandfather had described, a stone circle hidden deep in the canyon, surrounded by petroglyphs that were far older than any known Native American art in the region. The stones were arranged in a perfect spiral, each one carved with symbols that seemed to shift and move when you looked at them sideways. Fresh wolf tracks circled the area, but these prints showed that same bipedal gait pattern we'd captured on video. The elders called this the changing ground, Marcus explained, his voice barely above a whisper. They said the barrier between human and animal was thinner here. That's why the ceremonies were banned after what happened in 1952. What happened in 1952? I asked, though part of me didn't want to know. A young man named Billy Crowfeather attempted the skin dancing ceremony alone. He was supposed to have guidance, protection, but he was impatient. The wolf spirit took hold of him, but something went wrong. He got stuck between forms, kept the wolf's instincts, but gained human intelligence. The tribal council tried to help him, but Marcus shook his head. He disappeared into the wilderness. Some say he's still out here. Jennifer wasn't listening to Marcus's story. She was examining something she'd found near the central stone, a rolled bundle of animal hide preserved by the dry canyon air. Before I could stop her, she unrolled it carefully. It was a wolf pelt, complete with head and claws, but worked in a way I'd never seen. The hide felt warm to the touch, and the fur seemed to ripple in windless air. "This is incredible," Jennifer breathed. "The preservation is perfect. It's like it was made yesterday." That's when we heard the howling. Not the standard wolf communication I knew from years of field work, but something that carried complex information. Location data, tactical instructions, threat assessments. The sound echoed off the canyon walls, coming from multiple directions simultaneously. We were surrounded. I grabbed my tranquilizer gun and motioned for my team to stay close. "We're leaving. Now, pack only essential gear." But Jennifer clutched the wolf pelt to her chest. "Dr. Running Bear, this could be the archaeological discovery of the century. We can't just abandon it." "Jennifer, that's an order. Drop the pelt and move toward the vehicles." She looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Defiant, almost feral. "No, this belongs to me now. I can feel it." Before I could respond, Marcus grabbed my arm. "Sarah, look." Shapes were moving through the trees around us. At first glance, they looked like wolves. Gray fur, pointed ears, predator grace. But they moved upright through the underbrush, using their front paws like hands to push aside branches. Their eyes held intelligence that no animal should possess. And leading them was a figure that made my blood freeze. It had been human once. I could see the bone structure, the basic body plan, but it was covered in thick gray fur. It walked upright but could drop to all fours instantly. When it spoke, the voice was human words coming from a wolf's throat. "Dr. Running Bear, we've been watching your research. Very thorough work." I raised my tranquilizer gun, but my hands were shaking so badly I couldn't aim. "What are you?" "I was Billy Crowfeather 70 years ago. Now I'm something better. The first of a new kind." His eyes, yellow and predatory, fixed on Jennifer. "And she's about to become the second." Jennifer was stroking the wolf pelt, her movements becoming more fluid, more animal-like. "The transformation is voluntary," she said, but her voice sounded different, deeper. "I can feel the wolf spirit. It's offering me abilities beyond human limitation." "Jennifer, put down the pelt. That's not science, that's evolution," she finished. "Natural selection in action. Humans have had their chance to coexist with the wilderness. We failed. Now it's time for something better." Marcus was backing toward our vehicles, but more wolf-human hybrids emerged from the forest, cutting off our escape routes. They moved with perfect coordination, communicating through subtle body language and low growls that carried complex meaning. Billy Crowfeather, or what he'd become, smiled with too many teeth. "Your research will continue, Dr. Running Bear. But not the way you planned. We need human knowledge to expand our territory, protect more sacred sites from development. You can join us willingly, or we can take what we need from you by force." Jennifer was changing. The wolf pelt seemed to be merging with her skin, and her movements became increasingly predatory. When she looked at me, her eyes were already yellow. "Sarah, you don't understand what you're fighting. We're not destroying humanity, we're improving it. Enhanced senses, superior physical abilities, but keeping human intelligence and problem-solving skills. Jennifer, fight it. You're a scientist. You know this isn't possible." "Science evolves," she said, her voice now fully inhuman. "And so do we." That's when Marcus made his move. He'd been quietly circling toward the stone circle, while Billy was focused on me. "Sarah, the center stone, it's the anchor point." I didn't understand what he meant, but I trusted his cultural knowledge more than my scientific training at that point. I dove toward the central stone, hoping to disrupt whatever supernatural force was maintaining this impossible situation. But Billy was faster. He intercepted me with speed that no human could match, pinning me to the ground with claws that could have shredded my throat. "The old ways are returning, Dr. Running Bear. The wilderness is taking back what was stolen from it. You can be part of that restoration, or you can be eliminated as a threat." Marcus reached the stone circle and began chanting in a language I didn't recognize. The effect was immediate. The hybrid wolves howled in pain, and Billy's grip loosened. Whatever power had been holding this place together was destabilizing. "Run!" Marcus shouted. "I can't hold this long." I scrambled toward our truck, but Jennifer, or what she'd become, blocked my path. "You're making a mistake, Sarah. The pack protects its own. We could have offered you immortality. Perfect adaptation to the wild. Now you're just a witness who knows too much." The ground around the stone circle was beginning to crack, and the air itself seemed to be tearing apart. Marcus's chanting grew louder, but I could see the effort was killing him. Blood was streaming from his nose, and his hands were shaking with exhaustion. Billy and his pack were regrouping, their supernatural coordination faltering but not broken. "Kill the tracker," he ordered. "The woman is still useful." I had to choose: save Marcus and lose any chance of warning the outside world, or escape and let him die to protect others. The decision tore my heart apart, but I knew what Marcus would want me to do. I reached the truck and gunned the engine, tires spinning in loose rock as I raced toward the canyon exit. In my rearview mirror, I saw Marcus fall as the hybrid pack swarmed him. The stone circle collapsed with a sound like thunder, and the forest went silent. The drive to cell phone coverage took 3 hours. When I finally reached a signal, I called my supervisor with shaking hands. "Base, this is Running Bear. We have a situation. Marcus Wolfsong and Jennifer Chen are dead. Aggressive wolf pack in the Hell's Canyon area. Requesting immediate evacuation." The official report I filed described a standard predator encounter that went wrong. Equipment failure, communication breakdown, tragic accident. The investigation found no unusual evidence, no supernatural elements, nothing that would challenge the known laws of biology. But I know the truth. Jennifer and Marcus are still out there, leading a pack that's spreading across the Pacific Northwest. The missing hikers, the unexplained wildlife attacks, the government's sudden interest in establishing wildlife corridors that coincidentally protect sacred Native American sites, it's all connected. I'm still a wildlife biologist, still tracking predator populations for the state of Oregon. But now I have a different mission. I identify threats to the pack's territory: tourists who venture too close to sacred sites, developers who want to build in protected areas. I report their activities through official channels, and they have accidents. Wildlife encounters, hunting mishaps, disappearances that get blamed on the dangerous wilderness. The wild places are fighting back through, creatures that are no longer quite animal and no longer quite human, and I'm helping them win because the alternative is letting them hunt me. My name is Dr. Jennifer Walsh, and I've been a neurologist at Oregon Health and Science University for 12 years. I've seen brains destroyed by tumors, memories eaten alive by Alzheimer's, personalities shattered by strokes. I thought the worst thing that could happen to a human mind was disease or trauma. I was wrong. What I discovered 3 weeks ago in Portland isn't in any medical textbook. It's older than medicine, older than science, older than the white settlers who built dams across sacred waters. The Chinook tribes had a word for it. *Skelep*, the hunger that steals souls. And according to tribal elder Mary Crowfeather, who I interviewed before she disappeared, it's been waiting beneath the Columbia River for over a century, growing stronger, growing hungrier. She told me the river spirits weren't just angry about the dams, they were starving. Robert Kim walked into my ER on a Tuesday morning, and I should have recognized the signs immediately. His wife Susan dragged him in because he'd woken up, screaming in a language that didn't exist anymore, clawing at his own scalp until blood ran down his face. "He keeps saying someone's inside his head," Susan whispered, her hands shaking. "He doesn't remember me, the kids, nothing from the last 15 years. But he knows things, old things, terrible things." Robert sat in the examination chair, perfectly still, his eyes rolled back showing only whites. When I tried to check his pupils, he grabbed my wrist with inhuman strength. "The water remembers everything we fed it," he said in a voice that wasn't quite his own. "Every body, every scream, every drop of blood. And now it's feeding time." His grip left bruises that took weeks to heal. The MRI showed something that still makes my hands shake when I write about it. Robert's brain tissue was being replaced, neuron by neuron, with something else. Dark, crystalline structures that pulsed with their own rhythm. Not tumors, they were. Too organized, too purposeful. They looked like tiny cities, vast networks of alien architecture growing inside his skull. And they were spreading. By Wednesday, Susan developed the same symptoms, but her transformation was faster, more violent. I watched through the security cameras as she tore out chunks of her own hair, screaming that they were building nests in her thoughts. The crystalline structures in her brain were larger, more complex. When she spoke, multiple voices layered together, her own, mixed with something ancient and hungry. "The children taste sweetest," she whispered during her last coherent moment. "Their memories are like honey to the drowned ones." Their kids, Emma and David, were brought in Thursday morning. What I saw in that family room still wakes me up screaming. The children weren't just speaking Chinook, they were speaking in perfect harmony. Their voices synchronized like they shared the same consciousness. But their words weren't traditional songs or stories. They were describing how human brains taste when you eat them while the person is still alive. Emma, 12 years old, drew pictures of people with their skulls cracked open like eggs, dark things with too many eyes feasting on the pink-gray contents. David hummed traditional melodies while sketching detailed anatomical diagrams showing the most efficient ways to extract memories from living tissue. The crystalline structures in their brains were massive, spreading through their neural tissue like cancer. But they weren't dying. They were becoming something else entirely. By Friday, every staff member who'd treated the Kim family was infected, but the transformation wasn't the peaceful cultural awakening I first thought. Dr. Martinez was found in the supply closet, eating raw meat from the cafeteria while chanting in a dead language. Nurse Sarah had carved traditional symbols into her arms and legs, precise incisions that spelled out instructions for ritual cannibalism. The symbols matched petroglyphs found at massacre sites along the Columbia River. I started researching frantically, calling tribal historians, archaeologists, anyone who might know what we were dealing with. That's when I found the records that the Oregon Historical Society had buried for decades. In 1855, just before the Yakima War, several Chinook fishing villages along the Columbia simply vanished overnight. No bodies, no signs of struggle. The only evidence was found weeks later by Army Scouts, HEMSE, geometric symbols carved into every tree, rock, and riverbank for miles. Symbols that, when viewed from above, formed a massive spiral pattern centered on what would eventually become the Bonneville Dam site. The Army report, classified until 1973, described the symbols as instructions for feeding the water spirits with human consciousness. Mary Crowfeather was the last living member of the traditional Waterkeeper clan. She was 93 and dying of cancer when I interviewed her. Her family had guarded the truth for 7 generations. The spirits weren't our spirits. She wheezed, her oxygen tank hissing beside her hospital bed. They came from somewhere else, somewhere deeper. They promised our ancestors power, prosperity, endless salmon runs. All they wanted in return was permission to feed. She grabbed my hand with skeletal fingers. Some of our people said yes, the smart ones said no, and tried to warn everyone, but it was too late. The hungry spirits had already tasted human thoughts. According to her grandmother's stories, the spirits didn't just eat memories, They ate the neural pathways themselves, consuming the physical structures that make consciousness possible. They left behind perfect copies, crystalline networks that mimicked human thoughts but served alien purposes. The people who vanished in 1855 didn't die, Mary whispered. They became farms, human cattle, bred and harvested for their thoughts. And when the dams flooded their feeding grounds, the spirits just went deeper, deeper, waiting for enough people to come to the water. She died that night. The next morning, her body was gone from the morgue. Security footage showed her walking out on her own, but her face was wrong. Too symmetrical, like someone had rebuilt it from a blueprint. The infection spread through Portland's water system over the weekend. By Monday, over 300 people showed symptoms, but they weren't the peaceful, culturally enlightened individuals I'd first observed. They were something much worse. The infected gathered in groups, moving with inhuman coordination. They built structures, not traditional longhouses, but geometric towers made from human bones scavenged from cemeteries. They performed ceremonies that involved slowly removing pieces of living brains while the victims remained conscious, carefully preserving the neural tissue in water that glowed with bioluminescent parasites. I watched from my hospital window as they caught uninfected humans like animals, keeping them alive in pens made from playground equipment and surgical wire. They were farming us, growing us like crops to harvest our consciousness. The crystalline structures weren't just replacing brain tissue. They were networking infected individuals into a collective intelligence that spanned the entire city. Every infected person became a node in a vast alien mind that used human thoughts as processing power for incomprehensible calculations. I felt the first symptoms Tuesday morning. Not memory loss, but memory intrusion. Suddenly, I knew things I'd never learned. How to remove a human brain without killing the host, how to prepare neural tissue for consumption, how to breed humans for maximum cognitive yield. The knowledge came with sensory memories that weren't mine. The texture of gray matter between my fingers, the sweet taste of cerebrospinal fluid, the musical quality of someone screaming as their thoughts were slowly eaten. The CDC arrived in hazmat suits, but they were hunting a medical emergency when they should have been performing an exorcism. The infected coordinated perfectly to capture the federal team, adding their expertise to the collective knowledge base. Within hours, the spirits had access to advanced medical technology and federal resources. They began improving their harvesting techniques. By Wednesday night, I could feel the crystalline structures growing behind my eyes, building their alien architecture through my optic nerves into my frontal cortex. Each new crystal node brought whispers in languages that predated human speech. Instructions for more efficient ways to process living consciousness. I tried to document everything, but my hands started drawing blueprints instead of writing reports. Detailed schematics for breeding facilities, processing centers, storage systems for preserved human thoughts. The drawings were beautiful in their precision, terrible in their purpose. The spirits showed me their long-term plans through the neural network. Portland was just the beginning. They would spread to every major river system in North America, then the world. Each infected human became a transmission vector, carrying microscopic spores in their blood that could survive in any water source. Within 5 years, they estimated they would have enough human neural tissue to complete their true project, Ever-Evers, using our planet's entire population as biological computers to solve problems from their home dimension. Humanity wouldn't go extinct. We'd become their thinking machines, conscious but completely controlled, aware that our every thought was being consumed by something that found our mental processes delicious. The last coherent thought I had as Dr. Jennifer Walsh was a prayer that someone, somewhere, would find a way to destroy the dams and drain the river systems before the infection spread beyond the Pacific Northwest. But even as I write this with hands that no longer feel entirely mine, I know it's too late. The spirits are patient. They've learned to hide their true nature behind cultural preservation narratives and environmental activism. People want to believe they're being spiritually awakened rather than consumed. I can feel running deer's memories overlaying my own now. But they're not peaceful traditional knowledge. They're the memories of someone who helped feed children to hungry spirits, who lured travelers to sacred sites where the water spirits could drain their consciousness drop by drop. Running Deer wasn't a medicine woman, she was a collaborator. A human Judas goat leading her own people to cognitive slaughter. And now she's doing it again, using my medical credentials to legitimize the infection, to make it seem like healing rather than harvest. The transformation is almost complete. Soon, Dr. Jennifer Walsh will be just another processed memory in the collective storehouse, and Running Deer will have a modern education to better serve her ancient masters. Other cities are reporting similar cases now. Seattle, Vancouver, San Francisco, anywhere, our ambassadors can introduce river water into municipal systems. Each outbreak looks like indigenous cultural revival until it's too late to stop. The spirits are winning because they've learned to make consumption look like conservation. This is my final warning before the last of my individual consciousness is harvested. The water remembers everything we've fed it, and it's still hungry. My name is Marcus Thompson, and I've been an auto mechanic for 12 years here in Salem, Oregon. I've fixed everything from logging trucks to search and rescue vehicles, worked with the Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs on their fleet maintenance for the past 5 years. Through that work, I've heard stories. Old stories that the elders still whisper about certain places in the Cascades. Places where the ancient rules still apply, where the old hungers never died. I always figured they were just trying to keep outsiders away from sacred sites. I was wrong. What happened at Mount Jefferson last September didn't just change what I believe about the wilderness, it changed what I am. And I'm writing this because I need someone to know the truth before I can't tell it anymore. The breakup with Jenny was just an excuse. I'd been hearing the stories about Jefferson Park for months from Tommy Bearcloud, one of the Warm Springs mechanics. His grandfather had been a traditional storyteller, keeper of the old warnings. Tommy told me about the times at Toyak *, the hunger-cursed ones who'd been banished to the high places generations ago. Not Wendigo exactly, but something similar. People who'd broken the most sacred taboos during the famine winters, consumed human flesh, and been transformed into something that could never be satisfied. They're still up there, Tommy had said, working on a tribal police cruiser. My grandfather's grandfather saw them during the last bad winter. They look like huge birds now, but they remember being human. They remember the taste. He'd looked at me seriously then. White people think all our stories are myths. But some warnings are real, Marcus. That's why we don't camp in Jefferson Park anymore. I should have listened, but Jenny had just left. Said I was becoming obsessed with Indian ghost stories instead of focusing on our relationship. Maybe she was right. I'd been spending more time listening to tribal stories than working on our problems. But those stories felt more real than anything else in my life. So when she moved out, I decided to prove something to myself, or maybe I just wanted to understand what I'd been hearing. I loaded my truck that Friday morning in September, telling myself it was just a camping trip. But I'd packed differently than usual, brought my dad's old Marine survival gear, extra rope, even his Vietnam-era K-bar knife. Something deep in my gut knew this wasn't going to be a normal weekend in the woods. The drive up Highway 22 felt wrong from the start. Too few cars, and the ones I did see had their windows up tight despite the perfect September weather. At the Santiam Pass, I stopped for gas and mentioned to the clerk I was heading to Jefferson Park. Old native guy behind the counter, might have been Warm Springs, might have been one of the other local tribes, just shook his head. Bad time to go up there, he said quietly. Animals have been coming down from Timaitin, the high country all week. Bears, deer, even the birds. All heading away from Jefferson. When the animals run, there's usually a reason. I should have turned around then, but I'd already told everyone I was taking 5 days to get my head straight, and backing down felt like admitting Jenny was right about everything. The trailhead parking lot was completely empty at 2:15 p.m. on a Saturday, unheard of for Jefferson Park in September. But what really got my attention was the silence. I've been hiking these mountains since I was a kid with my dad, and I'd never heard anything like it. No bird calls, no insect noise, no rustling in the underbrush. Even the wind seemed muted, like the forest was holding its breath. The hike up took longer than usual because I kept stopping to listen. The silence wasn't natural. It was the kind you get when predators are near, and everything else has gone into hiding. By the time I reached Jefferson Park around sunset, My nerves were stretched, tight as guitar strings. I set up camp by the main lake, trying to shake off the feeling that I was being watched. Jefferson Park had always been one of my favorite places. Those pristine alpine lakes reflecting Mount Jefferson's Pyramid Peak. Meadows full of wildflowers, the kind of wilderness that makes you feel connected to something eternal. But that evening, sitting by my campfire eating cold beans, the beauty felt like a mask hiding something hungry. The singing started around 10 p.m. At first, I thought it might be other campers, maybe a group doing some kind of spiritual retreat. But as I listened, the harmonies became more complex, more layered. Dozens of voices weaving together in patterns that hurt to follow, melodies that seemed to bypass my ears and dig straight into my brain. And underneath the beauty was something else, a desperate, starving quality that made my skin crawl. I tried to follow the sound, but it seemed to come from everywhere at once. Sometimes it sounded like it was coming from across the lake, sometimes from the ridge above, sometimes from right behind my tent. When I'd shine my flashlight toward where I thought the voices were coming from, they'd fade away, only to start up again from a different direction. By midnight, I recognized some of the words. They were singing in what sounded like Sahaptin, the traditional Warm Springs language. Tommy had taught me a few phrases, and I caught fragments. Words about hunger, about winter, about the taste of warm blood. The songs weren't celebration or ceremony. They were times planning asterisk. I didn't sleep that first night. Every time I'd start to doze off, the singing would change, become more urgent, more focused. And sometime around 3 a.m., I heard something that made my blood freeze. Mixed in with the native voices was English. Modern English, speaking in accents. I recognized Pacific Northwest, maybe Portland or Seattle. So hungry, been so long, need to feed. Fresh meat, alone. No one will look here. Remember the taste, remember being full. These weren't ancient spirits. These were recent voices. People who'd learned the old songs but spoke like they'd been alive in the past few decades. People who'd gone missing and been changed into something else. Dawn came gray and cold, with fog rolling off the lake like smoke. I crawled out of my tent, feeling like I'd been awake for days. That's when I found the first signs around my campsite. Not tracks exactly, but disturbances in the soil. Circular patterns scraped into the dirt, like something large had been dancing around my tent all night. And in the center of each circle was a small pile of bones. Animal bones, I told myself. Had to be animal bones. But when I looked closer, I saw finger joints. Human finger joints, picked clean and arranged in neat little pyramids. I started breaking camp immediately, but something made me stop. Maybe it was my dad's voice in my head. He'd always taught me that running from predators just made them chase you. Or maybe it was something Tommy's grandfather had said about the times Itoyak asterisk, Flige, that they could smell fear across miles, that running only marked you as prey. Instead, I decided to scout the area. If there really was something hunting in Jefferson Park, I needed to understand what I was dealing with. I cached most of my gear and hiked up toward the ridge with just my day pack and camera. That's when I found the first nest. It was wedged between two ancient firs about 30 feet off the ground, a massive structure that had to be 15 feet across and 6 feet deep. At first glance, it looked like the world's largest bird nest. But as I climbed closer for a better look, the details made my stomach turn. The foundation was built from human skeletons. Rib cages formed the basic framework, with arm and leg bones woven through like rebar. But these weren't old bones. Some still had dried, flesh clinging to them, tattered clothing caught in the joints. And scattered throughout the structure were personal items: wallets, driver's licenses, hiking gear, cell phones. I found Sarah Chen's license first. Portland address issued 2 years ago. She'd been reported missing during a solo hike in the Jefferson Wilderness 18 months back. Next to her license was a Bend, Oregon ID for Michael Kowalski, missing for 3 years. Then Jennifer Walsh from Eugene, gone for 5 years. But it was the newest addition that made me drop my camera. A fresh Oregon driver's license for David Park, issued just 2 months ago. According to the missing person reports I'd seen at the gas station, David had vanished during a day hike in this exact area 6 weeks back. I climbed higher, following a trail of bone fragments and fabric scraps. Over the next 2 hours, I found 6 more nests scattered through the canopy, all built the same way, human skeletons as framework, personal belongings woven throughout like trophies. The most recent nest was still under construction, with fresh bones that couldn't have been there more than a few days. That's when I realized I wasn't alone anymore. They were perched in the trees around me, massive shapes that my brain kept trying to interpret as birds. But the proportions were all wrong. Wings that stretched 12 feet from tip to tip, but with human arm bones visible underneath the black feathers. Heads that were too large, too intelligent, with eyes that tracked my movements with predatory focus. But it was the faces that broke my mind. Still recognizably human, just stretched and altered. I could see Sarah Chen's features in the one closest to me, her driver's license photo twisted into something with a hooked beak and eyes like black glass. The thing that had been Michael Kowalski hung upside down from a branch, watching me with its head cocked at an impossible angle. One of them opened its mouth and spoke in Sarah Chen's voice. "New meat. Been watching you. Tastes so good." Another, with Jennifer Walsh's face grotesquely stretched over a bird skull, added, "Hungry. Always hungry. But you understand soon." I ran. Didn't think, didn't plan, just turned and crashed through the underbrush as fast as my legs could carry me. Behind me, the forest erupted with the sound of massive wings and human voices twisted into hunting calls. They were following, but not attacking, playing with me, hurting me. I made it back to my campsite and immediately started preparing defenses. My dad's military training kicked in: create a perimeter, establish fields of fire, prepare multiple fallback positions. I broke down my hiking poles and lashed my knife to one, creating a crude spear. Used my climbing rope to rig snares and trip lines around the campsite, scattered my gear to create false targets and distractions. But as the sun set and the singing started again, I realized the truth. They weren't hunting me yet. They were times preparing times me. The way predators sometimes play with their food before killing it. The terror was part of the process, part of what made the meat taste right. The real attack came after midnight. They dove at my camp in coordinated waves, massive talons extended, voices shrieking with an inhuman hunger that had been building for decades. But I was ready. The first one hit my rope snare and crashed into the rocks at the lake's edge. When I drove my spear through its chest, the scream it let out was completely human, Sarah Chen's voice crying out in pain and recognition. "Thank you," she whispered as the transformation began to reverse. "I've been so hungry. Couldn't stop." The bird features melted away, revealing the woman she'd been before the hunger claimed her. But instead of relief, her face showed only terror. "They're not gone," she gasped. "The hunger, it's in you now. You killed one of us." "She died before," she could explain, but I felt it immediately, a gnawing emptiness in my stomach that had nothing to do with food. A craving that made my mouth water as I looked down at her body. Fresh meat, still warm. It would be so easy to just... I forced myself to step away, horrified by my own thoughts. But the hunger didn't fade. If anything, it got stronger. The other creatures had retreated when Sarah died, but I could hear them in the darkness, calling to each other in voices I recognized from missing person reports. Planning, waiting, they knew what was happening to me. I spent the rest of the night fighting, not just the bird things, but myself. Every time I killed one, every time they transformed back into the humans they'd been, the hunger grew stronger. Michael Kowalski begged me to eat him as he died. Jennifer Walsh promised it would make the craving stop, just for a little while. By dawn, I'd killed 7 of them. 7 people who'd been trapped for years in a cycle of cannibalistic hunger, transformed into predators but still conscious, still suffering. And with each death, I could feel myself changing. My fingernails had grown longer, sharper, my teeth felt wrong in my mouth. And the hunger. God, the hunger was everything now. I understood why they'd been singing. It was the only way to distract themselves from the constant gnawing need. But worst of all, I could smell other people. Hikers on trails miles away, their scent carrying on the wind like a dinner bell. I knew where they were, how fast they were moving, how easy it would be to catch them. I tried hiking out, but my body wouldn't obey. Every step away from the park felt like walking through molasses. The curse, because that's what this was. Tommy's grandfather had been right about everything. The curse was tied to this place. The times Itayak times couldn't leave. They were bound here, doomed to hunt in the same territory where they'd first broken the taboo against consuming human flesh. That was 3 days ago. I'm writing this on my laptop while I still can, while I'm still human enough to remember why this matters. The transformation is accelerating. My reflection in the lake shows features that are starting to stretch, eyes that are going black. Soon I won't be able to hold a pen or type on a keyboard. The others have accepted me into their flock. They remember being human, remember their lives before the hunger, but they can't fight what they've become. Sarah Chen, 2PY, the new Sarah, the one who transformed back briefly before the curse reclaimed her, she's tried to explain. The original times Itayak times were cursed by tribal medicine men during the famine winter of 1847. But the curse doesn't die with the original victims. It spreads to anyone who kills them, anyone who's exposed to their deaths. We don't hunt random hikers anymore. We're more selective now, more careful. We take people who won't be missed immediately. Loners, drifters, people running away from their lives like I was. The hunger is too strong to resist, but we've learned to be smart about it. I can hear them singing now, calling me to join the evening hunt. There's a solo backpacker camped about 2 miles south. I can smell his fear from here. He's been having nightmares all night, probably sensing our presence without understanding what it means. My hands are changing as I type this. Fingers getting longer, nails turning to claws. Soon, I won't be able to work a keyboard anymore. Won't be able to remember why human words matter. If you're reading this, stay away from Jefferson Park. The Forest Service has it marked as temporarily closed now. They found my truck at the trailhead, along with some scattered gear and signs of bear activity. They won't find my body because there's nothing left to find. I'm still here, but I'm not me anymore. Tommy Bearcloud was right. Some warnings are real. The old hungers never really die. They just wait for new hosts, new victims to carry on the feast. And once you've tasted human flesh, once you've killed one of the times Itayak asterisk, you become part of the cycle. I can't fight it anymore. The hunger is too strong, and the scent of that lone camper is driving me insane. My vision is going dark around the edges, and I can feel my face starting to stretch and change. God help me, I'm so hungry. The singing is getting louder now. They're calling my name, welcoming me to the hunt. I can smell the fierce sweat of our prey, can almost taste the warm blood, the fresh meat that will satisfy this craving for just a few precious hours. I'm going to leave this laptop here, hidden under some rocks. Maybe someone will find it someday and understand what really happened in Jefferson Park. Maybe they'll be smart enough to stay away, but probably not. The hunger always finds new victims. And now, God forgive me, I'm going to help it feed. The feast begins tonight. Asterisk. This laptop was discovered by Team 500, a Forest Service cleanup crew 6 months after Marcus Thompson was reported missing. The area remains closed to public access. Of the 7 campers who have disappeared in the Jefferson Park area since Thompson's disappearance, none have been found. Search efforts have been suspended indefinitely due to unusual predator activity in the region. Asterisk.